Okay, I'm going to do a very quick description of binary and ternary form in the textbook. This is the spring textbook, part 3, page 52, discusses simple binary and simple ternary forms. For time's sake, I'm not going to play the musical examples,
Okay.
but you can go back and listen to those, and then those watching the videos can reference those, because there's plenty of recordings of the Bach pieces that I use on YouTube, and they're short, so it wouldn't take long to look at them. But basically, in the Baroque period is when instrumental works in general really develop. And that's an important distinction to understand, that prior to 1600, prior to the Baroque period, instruments really served the function of doubling singers or accompanying singers, but usually doubling the vocal parts. Or they played dance music that was literally danced to. And there were very few places, and this almost seems hard to wrap your mind around because we're so used to concert music, but the idea of just sitting still in a concert fashion and just listening to a group of instruments play is actually a late development in Western music. One of the few places that perhaps instruments were used strictly by themselves and people were not singing or not dancing are portions of the worship service where, there was in essence the idea of an organ prelude, or sometimes an organ, and through the Renaissance period, might simply play a vocal piece in the absence of singers. But instrumental concert music is pretty rare. Sometimes like an overture to a play or something perhaps, but it always serves this sort of other purpose. And so there just isn't a plethora of instrumental music to look at prior to 1600. It's a development in the Baroque period. But through the Baroque period, we do start getting in courts and within the church, I guess, an increasing amount of just what we now would think of as concert instrumental music. And then through the 1700s, you start getting public concerts. And that seems awfully late, but you got to remember too, it takes a bit of economic means to really make that work. Not just for the patrons who are, the audience who are going to buy a ticket. They got to have enough money to buy a ticket, but you got to have enough of an economy set up where musicians can make a living doing that. So it really isn't until you begin to get the bourgeoisie middle class, which is a recent development in Western history, that you start getting public concerts, and it's sort of then that there really is a need and the idea of writing just concert instrumental music. And I don't know if you've done instrumental composition, but I'll say I think it's particularly difficult over vocal, because the benefit of vocal music is you always have text. And text dictates form and shape and structure of the piece. If there's repeated stanzas or a repeated chord refrain, well, there's your structure. You're just going to simply mimic the poetic structure. But if you're going to sit down and write instrumental concert music and there's nothing to follow, then the real challenge for composers as instrumental music develops is this concept of form. What do you do? How do you structure that and have it make musical sense? And so the answer in the Baroque period is that Arcangelo Corelli is an important composer you'll study in the Baroque period, about a generation older or two than J.S. Bach. Their lives would overlap, but Corelli is definitely older. But in the 1660s, 70s, 1680s, right before Bach's birth, Corelli is beginning to write what are called trio sonatas, which are multi-movement, 4, 5, 6 movement works. The individual movements are short, usually about 2-3 minutes. And so you create length in the Baroque period, almost invariably not by, a Beethoven-esque 45-minute first movement, but by stringing together multiple movements that themselves are really not all that long. and each movement has a very contrasting sort of musical sense about it. That's the approach to Baroque composition. But those individual short movements in the Baroque period tend to be what we call binary form, which simply means, as one would guess, it's in two parts, and each of those parts repeat. And in terms of the harmonic structure, what happens is the idea of beginning in the tonic key and modulating to the dominant, and then within the B section, working your way back to the tonic and ending in tonic is sort of the typical structure. And that's what's meant by binary form. Ternary form is, you generally, as the name would imply, you would think of three sections. And the difference is that where the A section of binary form modulates, in ternary form the A section does not. It stays entirely within the tonic key. The B section is in the contrasting key. So if you're in a major, that would be generally in the dominant. And then the A is a repeat of the opening, generally. Or some sort of variation that we might describe as A prime. I'm going to switch to the blue. Maybe this one works better. Yeah, this one works better. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Now, there are the second Bach minuet, the minuet in G, which you would have played. It's not in my head right at the moment. But it is a unique piece in that the A section does not modulate. And I've got this marked. You got two 8-bar phrases, as I recall. Half cadence, perfect authentic, all in G. And then you've got, no, I'm sorry, this is forward. Yeah, it is 8 and 8. And then here you have 4, 4, 4, 4. Half cadence, perfect authentic in your contrasting key. So this is in G major, this is in D major. And then a final period, half cadence, perfect authentic cadence, back in G. Does that make sense? Now, although it appears to be binary form in the sense that it's in two parts that are repeated, 16 bars repeated and then another 16 bars repeated, looking at the harmonic structure, the A section did not modulate. There's a contrasting middle period here, right? And then a concluding period. This is actually in ternary form. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so it is important to note that sometimes, although in the Baroque period, you generally are going to see two halves in terms of the repeating structure of the phrases, that sometimes there can actually be a sense of ternary form despite the placement of the repeat signs. And it really has to do with, does the A section modulate?
Yeah.
And if the A section actually doesn't modulate, then that's ternary. If the A section does modulate, invariably that's binary. And the way I sort of think of this is modulation is the journey from home. And what one is trying to contemplate is, if in an opening section we have left home, then the remaining of the piece is the journey back, and that therefore it's in two parts. But if the A section doesn't leave home, basically what we've done is run around the house and explored. We've explored home before the journey begins. And then the B section, which modulates, is the journey away from home. And then it takes a third section then to sort of bring us back.
Yeah.
So the difference between binary and ternary form really does turn on this idea of whether the A section modulates or not. Okay, if that makes sense. The other structure in terms of binary and ternary form to talk about, and then we really will move to sonata form, is what's called rounded binary, which develops really more into the classical period than the Baroque. There may be some examples of rounded binary within the Baroque period, but all the examples that tend to be cited in textbook and stuff invariably are all from the classical period. So certainly my sense is that this is a later development, and if I find some Baroque examples, then I'll be all pleased. But the idea behind rounded binary is that we're still in binary form, and typically both of these sections repeat. So it's binary, and an A section that does indeed modulate. And again, I didn't put the minor to relative major, but those are your typical modulation schemes, particularly once we get into the high classic. Mozart, Haydn, this is an established norm in that time period. In fact, to my knowledge thus far, I've not encountered Mozart works that don't follow this modulation scheme. They're that ingrained into what he does. He just doesn't conceive going someplace different, which of course is what Beethoven begins to explore. Okay, so in A section it modulates in rounded binary, and what makes binary binary is that in the second half we have, an opening part that is in our contrasting key, either the dominant or if we're in minor or relative major, right? That then works its way back to tonic. But once we return to tonic, this final phrase repeats the music, the theme of the opening phrase. And it's that return of the opening melody, the opening theme, musical idea, that creates what we call rounded binary form. And so I think what this sort of represents is beginning to think of form not just in terms of certainly what repeats in terms of large sections or what is the harmonic scheme of the piece, but beginning to think thematically in terms of melody, in terms of the great tunes that we're casting into these forms. What should happen, and that idea that the opening theme ought to come back is pretty important to classical composition, if that makes sense. It's not germane generally to Baroque form, except in terms of rondo or what in the Baroque period would be ritornella form, and we will discuss those repetition forms after sonata. But in the binary form, the idea that something would come back in the B section is not typical. The Baroque period tends to just sort of spin forth new musical material, and it's really just the journey, through to the different key and back that designates the form. Okay, let me stop there before I run out of time. Got a low battery message.